Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the sharpest, most uncompromising, and no-holds-barred analysis on Trump Power Desk. Take a deep breath and cast aside every illusion of a fragile piece patched together with paper resolutions. Forget for a moment those sleek promotional videos boasting the invincibility of Western weapon systems. 90 seconds. Just 1.5 minutes. That is the time it takes an ordinary person to brew a cup of coffee or scroll through a few dull morning headlines. Yet, in the brutal art of modern warfare, those same 90 seconds in the heart of the Middle East were enough to tear open the sky, shatter the backbone of a mighty military alliance, and rewrite the entire global security order. The cataclysm did not come from empty threats shouted at podiums. It descended from the stratosphere, carrying the blinding light of judgment that incinerated every ounce of arrogance and every delusion of the Jewish state's invulnerability. In those 90 seconds, Israel's vaunted multi-layered air defense, the Iron Dome, Arrow, and David's sling was ripped apart. 15 of the most fortified underground bases on the planet, steel fortresses stuffed with billions of dollars and engineered to withstand even nuclear blasts, simply vanished. Not damaged, not temporarily paralyzed, they evaporated in the literal physical sense, reduced to glowing red concrete tombs at temperatures of thousands of degrees C. The hand that wielded the scythe this time belonged to Thrawn, but this was no swarm of slow, clumsy Shahab drones or outdated ballistic missiles easily swatted down by Western air defenses. This finishing blow carried the genetic code of cutting-edge hypersonic technology that has been driving the world's superpowers to despair before the air raid sirens in Tel Aviv could even finish their first whale. Before the most sophisticated radars of the Arrow and David sling systems could register more than faint flickering blips on their screens, massive kinetic warheads were already slamming into the Earth at speeds between Mach 10 and Mach 15. They tore through the atmosphere, generating an impenetrable plasma sheath that rendered every Western-made radio wave, every computerized air defense algorithm utterly blind and useless. No algorithm was fast enough, no launcher was responsive enough, and certainly no interceptor missile could chase down matter hurtling from the edge of space. Look closely at the list of 15 targets that turned to dust. These were not random warehouses or remote infantry barracks. These were the nerve centers of the Israeli Air Force. The hidden shelters housing elite F-35 squadrons. The strategic command posts buried dozens of meters beneath mountains where generals once sat in air-conditioned rooms, arrogantly planning strikes against the axis of resistance, convinced they were untouchable. For decades, Israel's security doctrine rested on a near fanatical belief. Their skies were an impenetrable iron dome, and their underground bunkers were absolute sanctuaries. In just 90 faithful seconds, that doctrine was crushed by a merciless new truth of asymmetric warfare. When the speed and kinetic energy of an attack exceed the physical limits of any defense system, even the thickest layers of reinforced concrete become as fragile as scraps of paper. This is the moment the world changed forever. But what exactly happened in those faithful 90 seconds? The weapon that tore through Israel's multi-layered defenses was no ordinary missile. It was a hypersonic strike package carrying the most advanced technology Thran has ever unveiled. A weapon designed from the ground up to defeat the best air defense systems the West has ever built. Before the first air raid siren in Tel Aviv could complete its wailing cry, before the sophisticated radars of the Arrow and David sling systems could do more than flash a few faint, chaotic blips across their screens, The hypersonic warheads were already ripping through the upper atmosphere at speeds between Mach 10 and Mach 15. Traveling at such velocity, these projectiles generated an intense plasma envelope around themselves, a blazing shield of ionized air that rendered every radio wave, every radar signal, and every guidance algorithm completely blind. American and Israeli computers, no matter how powerful, simply could not track or predict the erratic maneuvering trajectories these weapons executed in their terminal phase. There was no time for interception. No missile in the Israeli or American arsenal could accelerate fast enough, turn sharp enough, or survive the extreme heat and plasma interference to catch these incoming threats. In less than 90 seconds, the impossible became reality. 15 of Israel's most critical underground installations, the crown jewels of its national defense, were completely annihilated. These were not minor outposts or storage depots. They were the strategic nerve centers, hardened command bunkers buried deep beneath mountains, secret Air Force bases housing squadrons of advanced F-35 stealth fighters, and fortified communication hubs that served as the backbone of Israel's early warning and retaliation systems. Each of these facilities had been engineered at enormous cost to survive even direct nuclear strikes. Thick layers of reinforced concrete, shock-absorbing designs, and redundant power systems were supposed to guarantee their survival. Yet, under the sheer kinetic energy and extreme temperatures delivered by these hypersonic weapons, the bunkers did not merely collapse. They vaporized. Concrete and steel melted into glowing slag. Tunnels turned into high-press crematoriums, and everything inside was reduced to ash in moments. The destruction was total. No partial damage, no temporary disablement. These once impregnable fortresses simply ceased to exist, leaving behind only massive craters filled with molten debris glowing at thousands of degrees C. In a single stroke, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps had not only punched through Israel's legendary air defense umbrella, but it also decapitated the very heart of its air power and strategic command structure. The myth of Israeli invulnerability, the unshakable belief that its skies were an iron dome and its underground bases were untouchable sanctuaries, was shattered beyond repair. For decades, Israel had built its entire security doctrine on the assumption of absolute technological superiority and the ability to strike anywhere without fear of meaningful retaliation. In just 90 seconds, that doctrine was reduced to smoking ruins. The rules of modern warfare had been rewritten in real time, and the Jewish state was forced to confront a terrifying new reality. Its most sophisticated defenses were now obsolete against the speed and precision of hypersonic warfare. The age of unchallenged air dominance had come to a sudden, violent end. While the fires still raged in the craters where Israel's most secret bases once stood, a far more devastating collapse was already unfolding deep beneath the surface. Not of concrete and steel, but of belief and confidence. Inside the heavily fortified bunkers beneath Jerusalem, the atmosphere was thick with shock and disbelief. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his war cabinet sat frozen before banks of screens that had gone completely dark. Every secure line from the 15 destroyed strategic installations had fallen silent. No signals, no emergency transmissions. Nothing. The nerve centers that once coordinated Israel's air power and early warning systems had simply vanished. For decades, Israel's entire national security doctrine had rested on one unshakable article of faith. Any attack on Israeli soil would be met with overwhelming, disproportionate retaliation. The doctrine had once been presented as unshakable truth. Israel's layered air defense architecture, Iron Dome for short-range rockets, Arrow for ballistic interception, and Davis Sling for medium-range threats was believed to form an impenetrable shield over the nation's skies. Beneath that shield, deep underground command centers and fortified bunkers were designed to preserve continuity of leadership even under the most extreme conditions. For decades, this system had evolved into something more than military strategy. It had become a psychological cornerstone of national confidence, a belief in near absolute technological superiority. In a single compressed moment of crisis, that entire framework was portrayed as collapsing. The narrative describes 90 seconds in which long-held assumptions of invulnerability are suddenly invalidated. Command centers that once functioned with precision and certainty are depicted as falling into paralysis. Their screens darkened, their communication lines severed, and their operators left in stunned disbelief. What had once been confidence transforms into confusion, then into fear, as the imagined permanence of strategic security is stripped away almost instantaneously. This psychological rupture becomes the central focus of the account. The destruction is not only physical, but cognitive and emotional. A collapse of belief systems built over generations. Military officers and political leaders are shown grappling not merely with operational losses, but with the shattering of an entire worldview, one in which technological dominance guaranteed survival and deterrence ensured stability. In this framing, the most significant casualty is not infrastructure, but trust in the underlying assumptions of security itself. The narrative then expands outward to portray shockwaves reaching beyond the immediate conflict zone. In Washington, senior defense officials are depicted confronting the limitations of advanced early warning systems and missile defense networks when faced with rapidly evolving threats. Despite sophisticated satellite detection and tracking capabilities, the speed and complexity of the scenario are described as overwhelming traditional response structures. This creates an atmosphere of strategic uncertainty where long-established doctrines of superiority appear increasingly fragile under modern conditions of warfare. From there, the situation escalates into a broader regional and global crisis. Naval activity in critical maritime choke points is framed as a form of psychological pressure that disrupts global energy markets without direct confrontation. The Strait of Hormuz, in this telling, becomes a symbolic and practical flashpoint where perception itself drives economic instability. Shipping routes are rerouted, insurance costs surge, and global oil prices spike dramatically, triggering cascading economic consequences across multiple continents. The instability then spreads into a wider geopolitical chain reaction. Major powers are depicted responding simultaneously across different theaters, creating overlapping crises in East Asia, the Korean Peninsula, and the Eurasian continent. Military deployments, missile readiness, and naval blockades are described as part of a synchronized escalation cycle that stretches global command structures to their limits. The United States, in this framing, is forced into a position of reactive strain, attempting to manage multiple potential conflicts at once while maintaining strategic credibility. As tensions reach their peak, the narrative shifts toward nuclear escalation scenarios. Submarine-based deterrence systems and strategic bombers are introduced as final instruments of last resort, underscoring the gravity of the confrontation. Communication between global powers becomes direct and confrontational, highlighting the proximity of catastrophic miscalculation. At the critical moment, escalation is halted, and the system of mutual destruction is portrayed as enforcing a reluctant step back from the brink. In the aftermath, The consequences extend beyond military standoff into political and economic transformation. Alliances are strained, deterrence doctrines are reassessed, and long-standing assumptions about unilateral dominance are portrayed as collapsing. Financial systems are depicted as destabilizing under energy shocks and shifting trust in global reserve structures. The narrative concludes with a transition from a unipolar world order to a fragmented multipolar system shaped by industrial capacity, resource control, and strategic endurance rather than uncontested military superiority. Ultimately, the account presents a complete systemic rupture, military, psychological, economic, and geopolitical, framed as a single chain reaction. It portrays the end of an era defined by predictable escalation and technological certainty, replaced by a more volatile and uncertain global structure in which no single power can assume uncontested dominance.